resolutions, bit rates, frame rates, 1080p, 4K, 720p, 200 megabits per second. What is all this? I am confusing myself just saying this, but in this video I'm going to break it down and make it clear for you. Hello, I am Lee from Anything Cameras, the channel that focuses on helping you improve your filming and photography. And today I'm going to be running through what frame rates, resolutions, and bit rates are. So let's start out with resolutions. Resolution is how many pixels wide and tall your image is. So that's just how many pixels are in your image. There are the standard definitions of that you'll see a lot of 720p, 1080p, 4K, and well, there are two 4Ks, UHD 4K and DCI 4K. So I'm going to start out with the lowest resolution, 720p. So 720p is 720 pixels tall and 1280 pixels wide. And this is a lower resolution. You're going to see it labeled as HD, but you cannot crop in on this video or else it'll start looking all grainy and nasty. Next we move up to 1080p, which is 1080 pixels tall and a total of 1920 pixels wide. So that's 1920 pixels wide. Now you can crop into this video down to a 720p resolution, but it still doesn't look great because 720p is kind of low res anyhow. So I wouldn't suggest cropping in on 1080p video. Now we move up to UHD 4K. This is technically 4K, but it's not quite 4,000 pixels wide. When you see a 4 and when you see a number and then a K, that's referring to the width of the image, how many pixels wide. So when you see 4K UHD, it means that it's just a little bit narrower than true DCI 4K because of the aspect ratio. So that means it's in relation to its height, it's narrower, its width is less than DCI 4K. So UHD 4K has a 16:9 aspect ratio, which is the standard for video, same as 1080p and 720p. Now DCI 4K has a 17:9 aspect ratio, which makes it just a little bit wider, and this gives you just a touch over 4,000 pixels wide. It really doesn't make that much of a difference with online video production. It's not gonna affect your editing flow that much, but just something to keep in mind when you're looking at cameras that say 4K. It can be two different types of 4K, so just keep that in mind. So now that we've touched on what resolutions are, I'm gonna go to frame rates. Frame rates are how many frames are taken per second in a video. What a video is many images stacked together, so you just play them really fast. The more frames per second in a video, the slower you can play it back. So here's an example of video that was shot at 24 frames per second, which is a standard in the US. And now I'm going to play it back at 50% speed. Well, now it looks all jerky. So what you can do to fix that is film at, say, 60 frames per second, which is also another standard frame rate in the US. Now we play the 60 frames per second video back at 40% speed, which makes it 24 frames per second on the playback. And now it looks super smooth and it's all slow motion. So basically, the more frames that your camera can capture in 1 second, you can slow that video down more and more. So if you shoot at 120 frames per second in your camera, you can slow that video way farther down, 5 times slower than if you just shot 24 frames per second, because you can't slow that down. Now, you don't always want to shoot with a high frame rate because it's not always what you need. You don't always need to slow down your video. It makes the file sizes much larger and it makes it just harder to edit with. So unless you need to slow down your video, only shoot at either 30 or 24 frames per second when you're in the US. So that's a basic rundown of what frame rates are. Now I'm going to get on to bit rates. This is a little bit more complicated, but it's still pretty simple. And the basic way to say this is how many bits of information can be transferred per second. So a higher bit rate means that your video is transferring more information to your SD card. And this means that you can edit your video's color and its brightness more. So now when your camera captures an image, it collects all sorts of information right off the digital sensor. Now it has to compress this video so that it can actually be recorded onto a memory card and the file size won't be excessively large. Now, the less you compress it, the more you'll be able to edit it, like changing the exposure, changing the colors in the image. So a higher bit rate means that more information is being saved, and that way you can edit your video better. So say if it was shot and it's a little bit underexposed, you can correct the exposure easily and it won't start looking all grainy and nasty. You can also color grade the footage, changing the colors around, and it'll look nice. This is very similar to RAW photos versus JPEG photos in photography, although the difference is not that drastic. The downside to having a high bitrate is the file sizes are absolutely immense. 400 megabit per second files shot at DCI 4K are absolutely huge. They will eat up your storage space on your computer like crazy. So it's very expensive to store them, and it's a lot harder on your computer to edit them, so longer editing times, more money invested in your computer. Now if you're prepared to do this and you really want a high quality video, then go right ahead. But those are the downsides to shooting at a high bitrate. Well, that's a basic breakdown of what resolutions, frame rates, and bit rates are. I hope this helped you out a lot. I'm Leaf, and I'll see you in the next video.